Tonight, we're going to talk about juvenile recidivism. And this simply refers to the rate at which previously convicted youths are rearrested after release. And in America, around 80% of juvenile offenders are rearrested within 5 years of release. And when I looked at the statistic, this was very shocking to me. And it made me question if the methods of traditional punishment are really truly serving the function that they claim to. Because although retributive punishment such as detention or probation is meant to lower future crime rates, the majority of arrested kids are rearrested. And so this pattern shows an issue within the system. And so what I wanted to look at is if introducing therapy would aid in this cause. And what was found is that therapeutic-based interventions that address the underlying psychological causes of external criminal behavior are more effective at reducing rearrest than punishment alone. So why is that? Well, because there is internal and external. There's always an internal cause for external behavior. And we know that. We do this all the time in our own daily decisions because our thoughts guide our behavior. And so research proves that external criminal acts are often due to deep psychological dysfunction within these kids. And this is because that statistics show the majority of these kids who are arrested come from very rough backgrounds. They come from trauma exposure, single-parent homes, learning disabilities, substance abuse, things of that kind. So they do not have the tools to reacclimate back into society because no one is showing them how and no one is supporting them. And so all of my research that I conducted gave empirical evidence for therapeutic approaches in decreasing rearrest in kids. So one study gave a broad overview of 7 different types of intervention by looking at a meta-analysis of 500 studies. And they were either deterrence-based, so deterrence-based are things like supervision or discipline, or they are therapy-based, and this is things like cognitive behavioral therapy, which we'll get into a little bit later, or counseling or mentoring or things like that. And importantly, he found that juvenile populations were the most responsive to therapeutic methods, especially when dealing with things like ADHD or aggression. And this is why it teaches them to be self-sufficient when returning to a normal life. Because when they go back to normal life, they do not have that support for self-sufficiency. So they need it trained at a young age. And recent research helps this as well, as Farrington examined 12 types of intervention that were, again, either deterrence-based or therapeutic-based. And it showed the same thing, that programs that had the goal of redirecting dangerous thought patterns, like impulsivity, were especially effective in reducing recidivism compared to just punishment alone. But something that I wanted to look at specifically was this thing called cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT. And what this is it a goal-oriented therapy, which is made to transform dangerous thought patterns into a healthier perspective of life around you. In other words, it's trying to figure out why do you want to engage in criminal behavior and how can we change that? So one study was done where it overlooked 156 male juveniles in the Western US, and half of them went through one CBT program and the other half went through 2, and it wanted to compare the 2. So half went through aggression replacement training, or ART, and the other half went through this training plus another program called Thinking for a Change. And these programs were developed in the 1980s, and they were developed to trigger and pinpoint behavioral triggers and physical cues that lead to anger episodes. So basically, it's trying to see what is my body telling me and my mind telling me that leads me to criminal behavior, and how can we take those cues and readjust them so that a better decision is made. And so the juveniles were observed 500 days after training, which is about a year and a half after the trials were conducted. And what the results were that those who received 2 CBT programs had a 40% fewer rearrest than the singular program group. So this shows that multimodal programs for juveniles have a significant mark on rearrest by reworking the path of thought that leads to illegal behavior. So another study supported this, and it studied a group of juveniles, and half went through standard probation, so no therapy at all. And the other half went through weekly CBT sessions plus a phone call meeting, and these phone calls were made to basically readjust the goals or make sure that they're trying to do what the therapy intends to. And so the CBT group had a 51% decrease in recidivism compared to probation only. So this is over half. And so this shows that evidence is supporting therapeutic methods being used to reduce recidivism rates. However, this is not perfect, and there are limitations within the restorative methods for recidivism. Because restorative programs are not always implemented equally, and this can be because of the structure of the program, it can be because of the training of the therapists, but perhaps most importantly is the motivation of each individual child receiving the intervention. And this is simply because if you do not have the motivation to change, you won't. And we all know this. So although a kid might be going through therapy because they are forced to, they may be doing that to try and get back to their life as soon as possible, but not really applying that to their daily life, which is needed for long-term change. So that is a limitation. But nevertheless, high percentages of juvenile recidivism remain in America. And this is very prevalent, and it demands that we try other ways to reduce it besides just punishment by itself. If we fail to address the underlying dysfunction in kids, and yet we expect a difference in external behavior, that is a great misunderstanding, and it is begging for kids to be reintroduced to the criminal justice system. And it's very important to think about when you arrest a kid at an adolescent age, they are forming the way that they perceive the world and the way they believe the world works, about the justice system and about themselves. So when you arrest a kid and you put them through probation, you are potentially altering the rest of their life. You're altering their opportunities. You are altering the way others perceive them by giving them a permanent mark on their record. And you are altering the way that they perceive themselves due to isolation and labeling. I'm not saying to get rid of retributive punishment. I think that is necessary for justice and for legal things. But what is shown in research is that adding therapeutic methods to retributive punishment is much more effective, because arresting kids cannot be taken lightly. Too often, these kids are placed back into society without sufficient training of how to readjust to their life, and without encouragement that they can, without letting them know that there is a possibility of success in life. And so research consistently shows that therapeutic intervention paired with probation can be one of the best ways to reduce recidivism. So the issue of juvenile rearrest cannot be understated, but nor will it ever be changed unless we begin to address the mind, which is the core of each individual. Thank you. That's a good question, and that's something probably for further research. Mine looked at an overall broad view of juveniles. It didn't look at specifically ones in each group, but that's a good question. That's definitely one that I could add to further research. I'm sure it depends on also the level of the crime that they committed, and the level of their home status as well, but I can't speak on that professionally. A lot of it is trust building, so it's one-on-one therapy. So I think if the kid trusts you and trusts that you believe in them, that's at least doing something. Because a lot of these kids don't have anyone supporting them or anyone telling them that they're capable. So I'm sure that could definitely be something. But honestly, I'm not sure. It's very hard to label someone as unmotivated or you just don't want to without them explicitly telling you that. In one of the articles I talked about, it's like the art program was addressing basically the cues, and the Thinking for a Change program was trying to take those cues and redirect them in their decision making. So I think if the more help you can get, the better. Because some just address the most basic functions of why is this even happening, and then compare that to the programs that address, okay, how do we now change decision making based off of this kid? Because it's going to be different depending on the motive behind their behavior. If it's to get attention, if it's for escape, if it's to get something, it depends on each case. It's very hard with mandatory therapy. I think that'd be difficult. It depends, again, on the motivation levels of the kid and the home status. If parents feel that they are forced to put their kid into therapy because of something they've done, that could also be a problem at home. So I'm not sure. But I do think it would be very helpful to be more observant, keep an eye out for the kids that might need additional help and gently suggest that somehow. But I think that's a great idea.